The Public Works Committee meeting. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor.
Here.
Vice Chair Rader.
Present.
Councilmember Hodges.
Here.
Thank you. May I please get an approval of the agenda?
Chair, I move for the approval of the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments?
None received.
Okay, thank you. First item of business, may I please get an approval of the Public Works Committee action letter?
Chair, I move to approve the Public Works Committee action letter of May 12, 2025.
Second.
Thank you. First up is, I have an approval and a second. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor.
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader.
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Thank you. First item B, actually second item B, TMP-3345 An Ordinance approving modification number 1 to an agreement for professional engineering services for Raintree BEAP Bridge Repair with Great River Engineering for an increase of $64,605 with an amended not to exceed amount of $137,385 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Ms. Ward, thank you.
Kim Ward, Staff Engineer with Public Works. I'm introducing Modification 1 to the Agreement for Professional Engineering Services for Raintree BEAP Bridge Repair. This project was designed by Great River Engineering under the base agreement. The base agreement was for design services, and the modification will add construction engineering services to the scope of services. The city does not have the expertise to perform construction engineering services for this project, since it involves a specialized field of bridge hydro demolition, and Great River Engineering has more experience in this field. This modification will allow Great River Engineering to act in the city's behalf, having a daily on-site field inspector to inspect the hydro demolition of the bridge as it progresses. They will provide engineering support required during construction to ensure that the contractor is complying with project plans, specs, and MoDOT standards. Other engineering support during construction will include daily on-site inspections, documenting repairs, overseeing scarification operations, evaluating erosion and sediment control, and submitting inspection reports. Staff is recommending to proceed with awarding this Modification 1 to the agreement. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Rader?
Thank you, Chair. The increase of $64,000, is that because you're hiring a professional? What's the reason for the increase?
It's to add construction engineering services.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Any additional questions? Okay. Looking for a motion for approval?
Right, Chair. I move to recommend the City Council approval of agenda item TMP-3345, an ordinance approving modification number 1 to an agreement for professional engineering services for Raintree BEAP Bridge Repair and Great River Engineering for an increase of $64,605 with an amended not to exceed amount of $137,385 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor.
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader.
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next item, item C, TMP-3353, an ordinance awarding the bid for project number 1093 for the Raintree Spillway Bridge Deck Rehabilitation Project to Concrete Strategies LLC in the amount of $1,161,870.65 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Kim Ward?
The Raintree Spillway Bridge Deck Rehabilitation Project was designed by Great River Engineering and was publicly advertised on May 8, 2025, in accordance with local policies and state statutes. 2 bids were received, and Concrete Strategies, LLC was found to be the lowest and most responsible bidder. The primary components for the project include hydrodemolition of the bridge deck at partial and full depths. New guardrail will be installed, utility conduit will be repaired or replaced alongside the bridge, structural cracks will be epoxy filled, and exposed reinforcement will be cleaned for better adhesion to new concrete and to minimize future corrosion. New pavement markings will be placed once repair is completed. Staff is recommending to proceed with awarding this contract to Concrete Strategies, LLC. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions. May I please get a motion for approval?
Chair, I move to advance TMP-3353, an ordinance awarding the bid for project number 1093 for Raintree Spillway Bridge Deck Rehabilitation Project to Concrete Strategies, LLC, in the amount of $1,161,870.65, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. To council for full approval.
Second.
A motion and a second. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Ward. Next on the agenda is TMP-3339, an ordinance awarding the bid for project number 888 for the Curb Repair FY26 Program to Freeman Concrete Construction, LLC, in the amount of $3,395,895, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same. Thank you.
Good evening. Vince Schmager, Project Manager. This contract is our annual contract for curb replacement throughout the city. The primary curb that we're replacing is curb that was replaced roughly between 1980 and 2004, 2006. The concrete at the time, the aggregate, was a limestone aggregate that absorbs a lot of water. While it did meet the specs, everybody's specs at the time, it has been a less than performing curb product in the curbs. The current upgraded, we're using granite instead of limestone, hardening the curb. It's a little more brittle, but it doesn't dissolve like we've seen curbs. I'm sure you've all seen the curbs that just look like something's got on top of them and just started eating through them like acid. Well, that's what we're going for and replacing. Over the last 20 years, when we started this project about 20 years ago, an annual project, we had over 600 miles of curb to replace. In 20 years, we've replaced almost 400 miles. So we've reduced the amount of curb to close to 60%. We're getting closer to getting to where we can go smaller sections and get out of some of these neighborhoods where we're not disturbing the complete neighborhood when we're in there as much. This project was bid on May 8th, and it was advertised through the city's website, Quest CDN, which is the place where we advertise the bids. The bids are opened and tabulated and such, and then we send out a bulk email on that for contractors that we know are interested or have been interested in the past. The forgetting something here. We had four contractors pick up our the plans and started to review them. We had one responsive bidder for the bid opening on May 29th, and that was Freeman Construction, LLC. And their staff recognizes them as the lowest and most and best responsive bidder. Do I have any questions?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Councilmember Hodges?
So I'm curious, you said we only got one bid for it. Is that normal, or what's the reason for not getting multiple bids?
Normally, we have 2 to 3 bids on this project. We did have another bidder, but they were deemed non-responsive because of the forms they had submitted.
Okay.
When you submit when you submit your documents for consideration on the project, you have 2 documents you had to fill out. One of them was wrong. So as such, they were deemed non-responsive.
Okay. So we reached out to them and they just didn't want to fix it, or?
When we're opening the bid, it's a bid opening. I believe you have to talk to Scott about details, but I think we're getting into violations if we start saying, hey, would you like to fix this? The bids are open, and so
Okay.
we didn't even open it, didn't look at it. We have no idea if they were higher, lower, or any of that. We just, at the point, if your documents don't work, you're out of the race.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any additional questions? May I get a motion to advance to council?
Return.
All right, Chair. I move to recommend to City Council approval Agenda Item TMP-3339, an ordinance awarding the bid for project number 888 for the Curb Repair FY26 Program to Freeman Concrete Construction LLC in the amount of $3,395,895 and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Item E, TMP-3358, an ordinance approving change order number 1 to the agreement for construction of the crack seal FY25 project number 816 between the City of Lee Summit and Pavement Management LLC for a decrease in the contract price of negative $5,093.55 for a revised agreement amount of $291,906.45, and to increase the project timeline by 162 calendar days and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
So you saw the deduction, that's about a 2% deduction, which really, that's just part of, we have to do it in the change order to close it. The story on this one is the added days. Because crack seal is a very temperamental product, the streets have to be clean, and they have to be dry, and they have to be above 40 degrees. We were all set good to go, and then last Thanksgiving, you'll remember we got some snow and they started salting the streets. Well, that becomes a bond breaker. So at that point, we had to put the contract on hold. We restarted the contract again on April 9th, which they had 16 days to go. So between April 9th and May 23rd, we finally got 16 days of weather appropriate to put down the product. So that's why there's a increase of that 300% on days. It's because we had to winter the project, and then we had this wet and cold spring. Any more questions? I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any questions. May I please get a motion for approval?
Chair, I move to advance to council for full approval TMP-3358, an ordinance approving change order number 1 to the agreement for the construction of the crack seal FY25 project number 816 between the City of Lee Summit and Pavement Management LLC for a decrease in the contract price of minus $5,093.55 for a revised agreement amount of $291,906.45, and to increase the project timeline by 162 calendar days, and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the same.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next item, item F, TMP-3330, an ordinance approving the award of RFQ number 2025-051 to Stearns, Conrad and Schmidt Consulting Engineers, Inc., DBA SCS Engineers, for a one-year contract with 4 possible one-year renewal options for on-call environmental professional engineering services, and authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement for the same. Dave Lowe?
Hi, Dave Lowe, Engineering Manager. This is an agreement for on-call services for engineering, so it's not any particular project at this time. It's just for on-call over the years. Every few years, we will open this up to qualifications, see if other firms are interested in doing this work for us. So there's a process, a request for qualifications. 6 firms submitted onto this, and so we evaluated that and selected SCS Engineers as the best and most responsive qualification sheet. So SCS happens to be the one we've been using for a number of years already, but and they do an excellent job for us in this work. So if you got any questions, I can answer those.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Rader?
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder, do we have like a set amount of money that we set aside, a budget that we set aside to be able to pay for?
There is no set aside money for this agreement, but there are projects that will come in and this agreement will apply to. And that money is from the budget of, say, a road project where we're going to do like stormwater testing or something like that. We go to SCS to provide a quote or a proposal to do that stormwater testing. And we do a lot of the work is down at the Resource Recovery Park because of the landfill. We have a number of years we have to maintain that. So each project gets a proposal from the engineer, and we review that and make sure it is what we need, and there's a number set aside that is already budgeted in the budget for that particular project that it applies to.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any additional questions? May I please get a motion for approval?
Chair, I move to recommend to City Council approval of agenda item TMP-3330, an ordinance approving the award of RFQ number 2025-051 to Stearns, Conrad and Schmidt, Consulting Engineers Incorporated, DBA SCS Engineers for 1-year contract with 4 possible 1-year renewals, options for on-call environmental professional engineering services, and authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement for the same.
Second.
Thank you. May I please get a roll call?
Chair Pryor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rader,
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item 2025-6992, discussion stormwater utility discussion, June 2025. Mr. Binger?
Okay. Good evening, George Binger, City Engineer. This is I think it's the third or fourth in our series of presentations on the stormwater utility as part of a working group with Public Works Committee. This one is revisiting our level of service discussion. Last month we talked about level of service and this is kind of brief back, okay, making sure we heard what you heard, and then kind of talk through some of the costs and some of the changes or improvements we would get with that level of service. So when we talk about level of service, again, it's how does the system function? So we're talking about, how does it convey and carry runoff, our design criteria, construction materials, other things that we're looking at as far as, is this an opportunity for maybe some beautification enhancements, water quality, but the main goal in all of our stormwater management is the do no harm as we expand and maintain our system. And again, maintenance, and again, a lot of the focus that we've had on this discussion with level of service and stormwater utilities on the maintenance side. That's one of the areas of trying to keep up with the existing system where we do have some limitations as far as our capacity, as far as the crew, the personnel and equipment to keep up with the system. And then also we have regulatory requirements that we have to address as part of this. So again, when we look at a stormwater utility, stormwater cost center, these are the main elements we look at that generate cost associated with the system. And I think we've shown this slide several times in the presentations in the past. But again, you see the maintenance, water quality. We have the engineering and planning side, which would also include some of the customer service, and then in that program administration. Okay, so we're going to go kind of step through the level of service here a little bit. So if we're looking at our current level of service, our large stormwater projects are capital projects, and they're basically funded through our 2017 CIP sales tax up to about $25 million, where at this point we're kind of reaching the end of that pipeline here because we've had 26 projects, and we have Out of that, we have all 26 have been either constructed or designed. Then we have the failed infrastructure, which is the corrugated metal pipe program. That's basically replacing metal pipe that's causing sinkholes. And a lot of this is, and we talk about capital projects and flooding, we've been focused solely on flooding of existing structures. We're not talking about yard flooding, stream banks, streams out of banks and things of that nature. So the resources we have for that is currently within our engineering department. We have staff engineers working on this part-time. We have inspections related to the CIP projects. We have consultants that help with the design support. And then you can see there's the some of the funding sources. And one of the things with stormwater, since we don't have this ongoing funding source, we try to incorporate as much as we can into transportation projects. So this would be like replacing culverts. So if we have the opportunity to upsize culverts, like on Lee Summit Road, we had several failed culverts out there, so those were replaced as part of that project. On the maintenance side, what we're doing now is reactive. If you recall many of the pictures I've had in the past, I call it our orange fence level of service. That's where we get a sinkhole, we put an orange fence around it, and it may take us 12 months, 18 months to get that done just because of the workload and the priority of events and sequence of events. So that's the debris removal is if we have to clean out culverts, clogged inlets, repairing pipe. Again, that's kind of going after the sinkholes. Looking at things that we're trying to look at is, the general fund. Again, it's a priority consequence of failure. And so if there's a life and safety threat, a major roadway, that obviously gets pushed to the top of the list. And if you look at it, when I use that example, sometimes as long as 18 months to respond. When a work order is open, the average completion time is about 190 days to complete a work order for sinkholes. We've had 10 of those that took over a year out of that group. And then we look at where we're at now. That cost to replace per foot of pipe is about $400 to $680 per foot of pipe. And you'll see that later when we look at some of the rehab or maintenance options. We could have a 30 to 60% savings if we were able to go at it from a preventive maintenance standpoint. But the main issue now is we can't really keep pace with what's going on because we have the one crew that's dedicated to that, and that's basically, what they're doing the whole time. They call themselves the Band-Aid crew because they're constantly putting Band-Aids on metal pipe. From a preventive maintenance, about all we do now is street sweeping. We have the one street sweeper, and the goal is to go through the community and sweep each street once a year. So the resources that are attached to this are maintenance operators. We have a contract specialist in Public Works that maybe handles some of our larger projects, like if we have a culvert replacement where we don't have the equipment, we do some contract maintenance work on that. We have the dump trucks. If we have a mini excavator, it has to be rented. We do have the backhoe, and then skid steer with attachments, but that is also shared with other crews as needed. Mentioned the contract. We have an on-call contract for stormwater repairs for major pipe. We also have an on-call now for pipelining, relining, and grouting the bottom of pipes if we're able to get to it, and then the street sweeper. So this is looking at folks that are maintenance level service. Another requirement in our stormwater permit that the city holds is public education. At this point, we basically put up as a requirement signed streams. When roadways cross a stream, they're supposed to have, if it's named, we're supposed to put a sign up on there. We maintain the web page. We contribute to the Mid-America Regional Council's annual program, and then we have our stream team that has an event basically in the spring and the fall. So as you can see, our education is very light at this time. Our environmental specialist is basically able to put about 10% of her time onto the public education side of that. One of the things that we do a lot of on the customer service side is this private assistance, and this is reactive, entirely reactive. We get a call into Public Works. I'm having drainage issues with whatever it may be, stream bank erosion, water in the yard, water in the house, the basin for an HOA is clogged or is overtopping. So again, it's on a reactive basis. City staff can go out and meet with property owners. We don't do any design work. We don't tell them this is what you have to do, but we can kind of guide them that, hey, a contractor, a qualified drainage contractor should be able to address this. You may need to hire an engineer. So we can kind of guide them in that direction. We may be able to give some basic options, because if it's like some basic grading as far as swales and berms to redirect water. And so it's very basic what we can do, and it's entirely reactive. And again, that's done part-time as staff engineers or environmental specialists can support that. And then on the HOA maintenance inspections, that is a private property issue, so that's handled through our neighborhood services group. Okay, so looking ahead, what are we trying to get to? And this is based on the recommendation of adding a crew so we can adding crews so we can operate 3 stormwater crews out of operations, add a full-time public educator, have that environmental specialist committed to this full-time, and then add a full-time staff engineer dedicated to this. And you'll see we're talking about some of the resources adding at the end. So the stuff that's in gray is stuff I reviewed on the previous slides of what we already do. So when we talk about flooding, flood risk mitigation, one of the biggest complaints we get is related to stream bank stability. Homes that were built mainly like in the east part of town there, like the Vista Del Verde subdivision, very close to the East Fork of the Little Blue River, there's not really an adequate setback. And so a lot of times you have that stream bank erosion is encroaching on fences and yards. We see that in other parts of town. What we've done more recently with some of the last updates in the Unified Development Ordinance and the Design and Construction Manual is there are now stream setbacks. So there's like a 40, 60, or 100 foot offset from the center of stream where we have property lines. So we try to maintain it as common property so that stream can meander. Another area where we see a lot of issues with stream bank stability is existing utilities. So sewer lines or gravity flow, so they're always flowing to the low spot, which a lot of times our main trunk lines are near a stream. So as that erodes, it may expose the utility. So some of the things we could look at with an expanded level of service would be some things related to stream bank stability. We had an example a couple years ago where the Eagle Creek HOA had a stream bank issue. They submitted a work plan to do some channel stability work, some erosion control mat that they were putting in, and they've submitted a floodplain development permit, and we were able to work with them to inspect that. But that was done on private property at their cost. But where we get into a bigger issue is when we have these things where it's threatening a public utility and we need to take care of it at that point in time. Or do we want to expand this a little more as far as from a city perspective and, where if it's threatening a structure or a house that maybe we do want to do some work with a stream bank project. An example where we did that would have been on Bristol Drive, but the reason we did that project for stream bank stability was undermining a culvert. Now it happened to be encroaching upon a house very close to the stream, so that property benefited in preserving the structure. But the nexus to the public infrastructure with that culvert right there is what pretty much was the driving force behind that project. Without the culvert, we wouldn't have been able to go forward with that project at that point in time. Master planning. This is one that if you look at some of our city planning documents, most of the infrastructure systems we have some sort of a master plan. We have a thoroughfare master plan, water master plan, wastewater master plan. We do not have a stormwater master plan. And this is something that back in the late 90s, the city had gone through developing a master plan, which is basically a long list of places where we had flooding issues, and then a proposal to remedy that. And that was kind of the basis or foundation for that 2007 bond issue. But when we're talking about master planning, we're talking about, can we take on the potential of having regional detention? So instead of all these little basins around town as the PRI property develops, do we want to have a regional watershed-based detention to where we have one, and that could be turned into a retention where we actually generate a lake feature out of that. So that's what master planning can offer us. It can also offer long-term planning as far as funding, capital project identification, and things of that nature. The other is expanding our ability to support the private systems. So I know Councilmember Funk had a question about the letters we send out to HOAs, inspect your basin. Well, this might allow us to be more of a proactive approach to that, but it would also allow us to address cases where we have a private stormwater or public stormwater system upstream, then there's maybe 100 foot of private line in between, or it goes into a basin, a short private line, then it goes back to public. If we have a segment like that, is it really the right thing to have all of our public water going through a short segment of private infrastructure? Again, that's something we could look at as far as how that stormwater system is conveyed. And master planning would have a big impact on that as far as setting policies and programs for that. Then looking at smaller stormwater projects, we could be more aggressive on our culvert replacements, pipelining, the proactive maintenance, and then the extra crew would allow our public works operations to have some additional resources for that, as well as additional funding for the contract maintenance. So then on the right side, we're looking at the resources. Now this is going to be kind of some of the future discussion of how do we want to fund this, if moving forward. What's going to be the recommendation from this committee? Are we looking at sales tax, bond issues, a user-based fee, utility funding? We would, or a combination of those items. We would add a stormwater engineer dedicated full-time, and as I've mentioned before, the crew and the equipment to support that. And I'll interject at this time too. Please, if you have questions, you can ask as I'm going through this. So here we are on the maintenance side. Again, as I mentioned before, we had that 187 days to close a work order. If we can basically double the crews on time, on site, able to address that, we would be able to reduce that response time, more equipment, more people, and then we'd have another crew still available to do that preventive maintenance piece. So part of this preventive maintenance, are we looking at, would we be adding another street sweeper or something so we could have a more, we could do the street sweeping more frequently. We're looking at, with permit compliance, we have to recertify our permit every 5 years. So that preventive maintenance, that's an activity within the permit where we can show that. Are we looking, improved erosion control? So when we start looking at the more proactive erosion control when it comes to capital projects, right-of-way, just working the right-of-way and development. And then, because a lot of that comes with getting eyes on the system and the activities going on. And that's like the proactive inspections. One of the things that we would be adding, you see on the right side is that CCTV truck, the closed circuit TV. That would allow us to video the pipe that we have and identify areas of weakness or potential failure before it forms a sinkhole. And that would allow us to prioritize that pipelining rehab work. And so and then are we looking at a maintenance program where we have, BMPs, best management practices? Those would be like the rain gardens, bioswales, things that are maybe more like a landscaping type feature that we want to include. We have the parking lot here across the street at Arnold Hall. That requires regular, annual vacuum sweeping to clean the material and debris out of the spacing between the pavements so that the water can infiltrate into the pavement. So it allows more opportunities for things like that if we have that permeable type pavement, rain gardens. And the other would be litter control. Are we looking at more proactive activities with stream teams, litter collection, things like that? It would fall under a stormwater type program. So you can kind of see with some of that, there is some nexus where we can take benefit of other activities like we have with our right-of-way maintenance. So there is, a benefit to other areas as well. So then the resources, what we, again, proposing to add would be an ongoing CIP program. And right now, the one we have, the sales tax, that sales tax expires in 2032. It was a 15-year sales tax. That'll expire in 2032. Then we have, are we looking at something more permanent and ongoing? Then adding the equipment that you see there. The jet truck is a big one that our operations crews ask for because that's a preventive type maintenance where, if a pipe is clogged, we can jet it and clear the pipe so that the pipe doesn't back up and cause flooding. And then that, I mentioned the inspection truck, the vacuum truck where we have some of these places where we can remove debris. Then we'd be adding the crew, so we'd be looking at, you can see we'd be having 10 additional operators, an additional supervisor, and potentially another street sweeper. So that's what this level of service would add. And then on the education side, you can kind of see the list of things there we'd be adding, trying to be more proactive. I mentioned the HOA consultations, trying to work with the school district to have in-school programming. One of the other big elements we do a lot of is the flood risk management as part of the National Flood Insurance Program and the floodplain mapping. These maps change periodically, and when they change, it's usually adding more properties into the flood hazard area. And so there's a lot of communication that needs to go on with that as far as helping residents, how they can work through some of those issues. And that will also, I'll tie that back to the master planning piece, is if we can have a long-range master plan, we can do more things where a lot of times the issues we have with the mapping they've done at the federal level is they're looking at a statewide or countywide level. They can't account for the detail we get into developed urban areas. So they will model something for, a relatively flat area in northern Missouri, use that same rainfall approach and method. And our engineers are having conversations with FEMA on this all the time. That doesn't necessarily match what we have here in Lee Summit. I mean, most of our flooding is very quick. It's flash flooding. I mean, we're near the top of the hill, but we have these narrow streams that tend to come up very quickly and drain very quickly. So those are things that with this resource, we'd have more ability to work with that and with the and work more with on that modeling piece to really try to, and again, that's a big benefit for the residents because the flood insurance rates now are, we're typically hearing can be as much as $10,000 per year on the insurance premium because they're trying to move away from the federally subsidized program that started back in the 70s to where the insured property owners are paying full price on that. And that's just because the program is run out of money at the federal level. So those are some of the changes that are ongoing. But again, that's something that on the education side, the design side, the planning side, we could hopefully address that. So what the people we would looking for that, I mentioned the full-time educator, additional customer service staff, working more with the schools, and then that public education material so people can be more informed about these things. Okay, private assistance. This is an area where we get a lot of complaints, a lot of service requests, and right now there's not a lot we can do. So if this is an area we're looking to expand, again, we've talked about the HOA basins, as you mentioned, the flood mapping, flood hazard, the programs, working, spending, working with residents on that. And then I mentioned that taking on those short segments of private system that are between two parts of the public system. Is that the right thing to do? Is that a policy we want to take on? And again, I'll tie that back to kind of the master planning and the policies that we set, is that will help guide this. Because if we say we're going to take over all streams, we can't afford it. If I say we're going to take over all the private systems, we can't afford it. But if we have a good policy in place and good planning in place, we might be able to have that. And I'll use Vince's presentation on the Curb program. I mean, when you say we've got 600 miles and so many millions of dollars of curb repair, it looks very daunting. But we've been sticking with it now for 25 years, and we're starting to kind of get over the hump and see that. And I look at stormwater as the same way. We're kind of behind the curve now, but if we can get started and just be persistent and have that long-range vision, we can start progressing on this and just bit by bit, little by little, making each area a little bit better. So again, the resource, the public educator, and potentially taking on additional infrastructure. Okay, so kind of summarizing this again, adding 2 crews, the equipment, the additional funding. Now, that cost, $5.7 million per year, was in 2022. That's when, working with our consultant, Black & Veatch, they went through a detailed analysis of our current budget, the levels of service, and this is the cost estimation. Adjusting, doing, instead of going back and restudying that, just doing a simple adjustment for inflation, we're looking at a little over $6 million per year for the level of service that I was describing. And I think, so now we're looking at, okay. So again, we're looking at, this is more of on the equipment and staff we're looking at. Now, one of the things that this does not include in our cost, here you see that last bullet point, billing systems. That's kind of going to be determined on the funding level. And stormwater utilities, those came about in the late 80s, early 90s with the Clean Water Act amendment, which added this water quality requirement to the Clean Water Act, basically, limiting pollution, because before that, the Clean Water Act was, adding stormwater to the Clean Water Act, because initially the Clean Water Act was addressing sanitary sewers, and 1987 added stormwater to that. Well, that was an unfunded mandate. So that's when local communities and agencies started looking at creating a stormwater utility, basically a user fee-based approach. And so that's why you'll hear that term. And it's basically, state by state, it's very different. And if you look on the Kansas side, they have quite a few stormwater utilities, but they have a legislation that makes it very easy to set up administratively. Whereas if you're doing that, being as a utility, you have a monthly billing system typically associated with that. So again, there's additional cost associated with that. Okay, so where are we going next? Well, obviously, we'll have, questions, but confirming, tonight we're looking at, are we confirming, is this the direction we want to go? Are there things that we're saying you may not like or doesn't sound right? Or is it, yep, we're hearing you and kind of conveying and relaying what we think you're saying? And then, we talked about the staffing, additional staffing to support this. So next step is starting to talk about some of the details on funding. And again, this is the structure: fees, taxes, collection system, and then come up with a recommendation for council. So with that, I will, we're opening up for questions, or ask if you have any additional questions or want to go back and revisit.
Thank you. Councilmember Rader?
Thank you, Chair. So are you wanting us to discuss avenues of which we would pay for it tonight? Or you said next steps. You kind of had it in the previous bit.
I think we're looking at next month, kind of lay out just very simply, here are some of the options. Get your initial thoughts on it, and then come back in August timeframe with a more detailed discussion of those topics. So what we're trying tonight, are we talking about the right staffing, the right equipment, the right level of service, the right responsiveness, I think, is what we're asking tonight.
Well, then I would say yes, I think you have. You've been very thorough and detailed with it, so we know what we're getting into.
Okay.
And I know this is something that has been discussed for, I think, years. And so I just wanted to know, has it ever gotten to the point where it's been put before the public as far as financing, or not financing, but how it would be paid for, as far as whether it would be like sales tax or a bond type of a situation? Has it ever gone that far to put it out there, or has it just never gone to the point where we've
Councilmember Rader, I can maybe help answer some of that question. No, we have not gone to a ballot measure with this proposal. In fact, we were almost there. I'd say it's almost 2 years ago. And then we kind of pulled back a little bit. There were other, I guess, what you would say, influences with regard to having a potential ballot measure, and it just didn't feel like the right timing. That seems to be a pattern, every time we get close. But we actually have done and engaged the community in developing a recommendation, and that's where we led, and now we're backing up to confirm were those recommendations correct, was the level of service correct, and then the amount we're trying to fund correct before we take it to a ballot measure. And so, there was community involvement in a stormwater task force. They helped through a study. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in developing a study for a rate for a stormwater utility that was proposed to the mayor and city council about 2 years ago. But for the timing, I think we would have probably advanced it then. But rightfully so, the mayor and council have said, let's take a step back. Let's reassess the situation and have we properly defined. And that's what we're talking tonight. And hopefully the feedback is either we're proposing too much level service or not enough, or we've hit the sweet spot. And if you tell us we're at the right spot, we're now moving to the next step, which would, as Mr. Binger said, essentially present a budget and talk about some of the work that's been done, and did those previous recommendations of a utility rate still hold versus the alternatives of a sales tax or property tax. The previous study and the Stormwater Task Force, made up of residents and HOAs and other stakeholders in the community, arrived at a rate as opposed to a tax, a rate that's associated with the amount of impervious area for each development. So it's a correlation of how much runoff do they generate in development pays for the maintenance, operation, and improvement of that system. I think it was in our conversations with the Public Works Committee and the City Council previously, the property tax proposal was clearly off the table. Nobody wanted that one. Stormwater Task Force did not like that. The sales tax was a conversation. It wasn't well supported, but it might be something the committee wants to revisit after you get a better budget proposal, assuming we've arrived at a level of service. And it's okay if you haven't yet. We can come back the next month and talk about questions you have about level of service. But we have to get a level of service identified that everybody's in agreement, this is what we want, because we can't base our costs on something that's constantly changing. Hopefully that helps answer your questions.
So as I remember on the last presentation, we had two options, did we not? We had
Yes,
a
we
less
did.
expensive one and then the most expensive one.
Right,
And this one you talked about today was the most expensive one.
that is correct.
So does it make sense to figure out what we think that would cost for the most expensive one? And then,
Yes, that's. I think when we hear the feedback, if you say, yeah, this is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You haven't shown us anything that we don't want, and you haven't missed anything that we want, we need to go back and update our budget. Mr. Binger has shown here in his slides what that estimate currently is, but we need to make sure that it includes everything, and then we'll come back to you next month with
So
an
we could
updated
always-
budget
yeah.
that addresses all of these proposed levels of service that were just reviewed, and then we'll say, was the proposed rate study match that cost analysis, that budget, or not? And is the right source of those revenues appropriate?
that sounds very good.
The difference between those two was about $1 million per year.
And if I could add just a couple of things. The reason why we really want to focus on this level of service is because we also want to make sure that expectations are clear. Because when we're talking with the public about potential new fees, however that is, we know that there's a funding gap right now to be able to provide this service. We want to make sure that we're being very clear with what the service is that we're able to provide. Because that really what it boils down to is the limiting factor in what we're able to actually achieve is going to be determined by essentially this budget.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you, thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks, Chair.
Councilmember Hodges.
This might be a silly question, but I'm thinking down the line when we're going to be, probably doing a fee. If we're asking people to be okay with this, how, I guess, as somebody who maybe doesn't deal with any of these issues, they're probably going to be more like, I don't want to pay for it. Well, there's a lot that do. So how would you present to somebody and say, here's how you would benefit too? Or I mean, as a general statement too, to anybody, but just how would you be able to sell this to somebody, I guess?
Well, that is one of the hurdles. That's very clear. But generally, the approach is stormwater is a resource to be managed. So when you think in terms of lakes, ponds, streams, everyone benefits from that. When you think in terms of the water is going to go somewhere. So like a lot of our parks have streams and creeks that people enjoy. Legacy Park has, the pond out there, which is a water feature. We have several lake communities. And so part of it is you're looking at the quality of the water, which is the litter control, the stream teams, the quality of the lakes. And then from the flooding standpoint of ensuring that as that water goes downstream, it's not flooding your neighbor. So that's kind of how we generally approach it from that perspective. And the other point of it too is there's a lot of pipe underground that people don't see that may be in their backyard. People have, and so it's reducing that response time if we have to do work in the yard, if we have to do, to do that, and hopefully preventing it entirely to where we don't have a sinkhole that's right next to a house. So that's kind of some of the issues, how we try to convey it.
So would you say that this is giving you the ability to be more proactive rather than reactive?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was hoping you would say.
Yeah, I might also elaborate. This is one of the questions that the council kind of left us with to address.
Yeah.
The public education before ballot measure, the billing systems. There's a number of these things throughout the rest of this year we're going to have to address as a committee. And that is a really tough question because you're right. Some people are like at the top of the hill. They don't understand. But along every roadway or just about every roadway, there is some sort of stormwater collection and conveyance system, whether it's underground or it's a roadside ditch. Their stormwater, it drops, it hits their yard, it goes somewhere. The other element, and while they may say, well, okay, I really don't care much about it, but a lot of these, if we don't address them, become life safety issues. And so our general fund budget is what it is. It's finite, and it's shared among police and fire and public works road maintenance and all these things. If it's more costly for us to react to these failures than it is to address them preventatively, we're taking their very same dollars and we're redirecting it towards a stormwater crisis that we could be spending in a service delivery elsewhere in the community. So there it affects them too, because we're using their tax dollars in a more productive manner. And there could also be, depending on the source of funds, maybe we're taking, like George had proposed, 3 crews to address stormwater. Well, one of those 3 crews already exists today, but it's being funded by the general fund as opposed to being funded by a stormwater utility. So some of this has to do with the kind of detail of how monies flow, and all those monies are taxpayer monies, where maybe we can improve other levels of service if we rebalance where those revenues come from.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that explanation. And I guess my other question too was, I know you mentioned, working with HOAs, but I know there's a lot of, especially older neighborhoods that don't have the luxury of having HOA that they just write a check to and think, okay, good, that's building up a fund for whatever may happen on a rainy day. How can we, are we able to help them a little more? Like, how does that work for them? Because it's kind of not fair in a way, but I don't know, how do we handle that?
Well, that's a complaint we get a lot, is the fairness issue of stormwater. But when we're dealing with neighborhoods that don't have an HOA, we're typically dealing with individual property owners. And so that's where if we have an individual property owner coming in, and we'd have to work with them on a case-by-case basis. One of the bigger challenges are these areas where there may be an HOA, but the HOA doesn't own the creek. Each home owns like 120 feet of the creek along the way. And that's a very challenging situation. And I think that's the kind of conversation or level of service discussion or policy we'd be able to have that conversation with this approach. So again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis.
Councilmember Hodges, I think in the level of service where we talk about private infrastructure assistance, and it needs to be defined by policy, the scope of what that might include, that's usually where we get the complaints, and we are listening by including that in the level of service, where if it's an individual property owner, there's no way they can afford, a $200,000 stream bank stabilization. And they're like, this is only, and there's a real example, probably over in your district, where it's 300 feet long between 2 public infrastructures, right? And these homeowners say, I can't afford this. That's exactly what we're talking about in this level of service, that where you only have a few hundred feet and you've got city system and you got city system and this little gap in between is expected to be maintained by property owners and it is failing, is this a program that could address that? Could they help that situation where we can narrowly define taking over some of the private system and maintaining it with this revenue source to help those burdened property
So
owners?
when you say take over, because I'm thinking of a project that we dealt with, I think, last year, they had to make it, I guess, they had to fix the problem before the city would take it over. So how would that work in this program? Would they still have to pay to get it, make the situation right before the city would take it over?
I think it depends on how we define the circumstance that would be subject to the conveyance from private to public.
Okay.
Of course, I think you would have your own criteria that they have to donate any easements if that's necessary. But in the case of the one I'm thinking of just east of 291, just south of Langsford, it really is a matter of just, I think it's like 200 feet. And it's two very large public systems connecting on either side of it. To me, that seems like we could create a policy or even regulatory criteria that says that fits, we'll take it. You don't have to put anything into it. It's
Yeah.
threatening your property, it's threatening your house. We could take it. But you're gonna have to put constraints on that because you don't wanna say, well, it's a half-mile long stream in the backyards and it's not really threatening anything. No, you kind of bought what you bought. That's your responsibility as a property owner, so.
Yeah. Okay, so you're saying that once we like this broad plan, you guys will then go in and make stipulations and say, well, it meets this criteria, but it doesn't meet because we have this in here that says no.
We've had some conversation about it. Of course, we don't want to advance that conversation before we get to
Right.
any, successful vote. But those would also then engage you all to say, what is the policy? Where do we draw the lines to say the city will take this over to maintain it? And I think that's a critical component to the level of service.
Okay.
If you're saying you saw that on the slides, and that's what I'm talking about now, it's getting out there, that's our intent, is for these very focused areas that, if funded, that's the level of service the community wants the city to take. Yes, if you're saying, no, we don't want you to take any system, you need to let us know so that we don't budget for that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. No, that's
Kind of two categories we look at to kind of categorize that or prioritize is we look at the likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure. So if we're looking at something very high likely to fail and a high consequence, that's a way we can go into that. So like in this case with that private system, okay, if we're looking at it's within 5 feet of a structure on the outside bend of a stream and it's fairly short, we're looking at it's fairly likely. If it's a mile-long stream, it's probably not as likely. So that's kind of a big picture, how we can, without getting into details of kind of how we kind of start with the framework and then work our way down to the detail level from that.
And when Mr. Binger refers to consequence of failure, it's not limited to the consequence of that property owner, which you often see in private improvements and it's failing. It's a parking lot, for example, and they're like, city, come and fix the parking lot. Well, the consequence is really just on that property. When it comes to stormwater, the failure consequence isn't just for that property, but because you got two public systems, you're now impacting the public system on downstream and potentially even upstream of where that failure occurs and affecting not only the system and how it functions, but those property owners upstream and downstream.
okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Part of the current challenge is that we're really limited with the resources to be able to even develop a program that we'd be able to implement in any sort of fashion right now. So this would be a way to develop those programs for those policies that Michael and George have been talking about. But they could also take different forms too of whatever that program is based off of how we could provide different technical assistance and things like that. I kind of think of our neighborhood traffic safety program as one. There could be something similar developed for the stormwater side of things.
Okay, so it's just broadening our resources as a whole, so we can do
Correct.
more. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Nope. So I personally like this level of service. And I think, so like next month, do you think that you would have different cost, is that what you said? Different cost options based on, so like,
We'll have the higher level discussion on funding mechanisms, which is, Mr. Park had described before, is generally sales tax, a property tax, and then the user fee.
And you'll break it down for all of those. And you said we could do a combination, or we could do just, like, have it on, like, the water bill? Is that kind of the direction we were leaning last time?
So I don't know that we'd be prepared to talk about the billing and collection process. Let's take the first step of saying, here's the budget for this level of service, if that's what you're directing. Review the funding sources, being property tax, sales tax, or user fee, and then kind of make a decision there. We can also probably likely present the previous recommendation, so you can have a discussion about that. And then I see the subsequent meetings following through with some of the other questions that the committee had left us with 2 years ago. And the next one is probably that billing and collections. How would we go about that?
Okay, thank you. I want to see this go through this time, just because I know we are so far behind with stormwater. So the longer we wait, the more behind we're getting. But yeah, I like this level of service. When you do the cost breakdown, will you provide with this level of service and the other one? Or from here, if we decide this level of service, will it just be this level of service going forward?
I would suggest just discussing this particular level of service, because the main difference between this one and the other one is one crew, this is that extra crew, and then it's a limited capital improvement project budget, whereas the other one, there's no capital work involved. But that was kind of, maybe that ends up being that combination. So I think it's fairly easy to break out, because what it does is it shows, because like that's what I say, like the blended approach, so if we have a user fee for just the operation, then CIP is funded another way. So yeah, we can do that fairly easily.
Okay. Are you guys both on board with this level of service? Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Any more questions? Nope. Thank you very much. So I guess that takes us to Roundtable.
I don't have anything to share this evening.
Okay, then I guess we'll adjourn the meeting at 5:34. Thank you.